This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are live here in the studio. Been on the road here for a little bit. Actually, I'm getting ready to head out here. But we have a great guest for us this week, and we're going to hop right into it because we got a lot of content to cover today. We also have a little bit of a surprise in the fourth segment. We are announcing a new show that we'll be launching. We're going to share some more information about that, so you want to stay right through to the end. Now, Jared and I kind of met. There was a guest we had on a couple of months ago, Aaron Walker, and Aaron and I got to talking about Rwanda. And Aaron, in the middle of the interview, says, "Oh, I've got a guy you've got to meet." And so, Jared, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your Sunday to come join us here at Killer Innovations. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored, and I'm a big fan of the show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so Aaron and I somehow in the interview, I don't know if it was in the middle of the interview or maybe during the commercial break, we got into a discussion about Rwanda and Africa. And he says, "Oh, you've got to meet Jared." So, and he gave me a little bit of your background. You and I have had a conversation on the phone to kind of get to know each other based on the Aaron Walker introduction. And I said, I got to have you on the show. Your experience in East Africa, your view on innovation in philanthropy, which is one of my passions. I run two nonprofit charities, one for education in Rwanda and another for autism. So I wanted to get you on the show, but before we because you and I will get spun up here, we'll be chasing squirrels here pretty quickly in the conversation. So Indeed. Before we get started, give the listeners a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are today, because you've done a lot of things in a lot of different parts of the world.
My mother says I've lived a lot of lives in a very short amount of time. Yes.
That's one way to refer to it.
I've tested the 9 lives scenario a few times as well, but I started I would say that I kind of officially moved into more of an activist kind of role, more of a traditional type of, picketing and protesting and whatnot. When I was around 17 or so, I was just out of high school, and I started working with American Indian Movement, and then with Leonard Peltier Foundation, and so on. I was also always kind of infatuated with the idea of Africa. Looking back now, after having talked about this enough times over the years, I realize I think I kind of had this, I've always been kind of a, Braveheart kind of guy. Like, I like the rawness of life, and I want to be outside. And I think that some of the indigenous cultures, the American Indians, the Maasai in Africa, and lots of other cultures, even Celtics and so on, I have always been enthralled with that. So it's had a big influence on my life. I've also always been an activist at heart. Any of my business partners that I've worked with over the years can certainly attest that I'm first an activist and second a businessman. I try to interweave them these days.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's a little bit of the balancing act, right? And for those of us who've played some form of an activist role, either to right some wrongs or an area of interest, passion, sometimes can get out ahead of us sometimes. Indeed.
Yes, been there. I still visit that territory frequently. But I've always been, I was raised in an entrepreneurial family. My father's an entrepreneur, my brother as well, and my sister is, the whole family. My mother is an author, father's an author. So I had that kind of always sort of innately woven into my life as well. So I've got this entrepreneur side, and I've got this, ardent activist, philanthropist side as well. And that led me all over the world. I traveled all over the United States, lived in a van, like as I traveled, and just living kind of an alternative lifestyle, not for the sake of doing it. That's just what was my preference. And then you and I talked at one point about the work in New Orleans during Katrina.
Right. It turns out that you and I were both in New Orleans. We were both responding to the Katrina disaster.
Indeed. So that led me, I went down there. We created a sort of innovative program, and realizing there wasn't any Wi-Fi down there, at least until you got there. And my business partner and I created a program using fax machines to help get people to places where they could get housing and so on and so on. We don't have to go into details, but I had a crazy experience there, and similar, I think, to what you and I talked about with yours as well. It wasn't the most peaceful places to be. We were taking on enemy fire.
Yeah. And when you're going to a city to help somebody and you get shot at, that kind of sets the tone for the whole effort.
Yeah, it was a bit confusing even for me, and I had been kind of in the activist and humanitarian realm my whole life. Anyway, so I went through that, and it wasn't long after that I think it was about six months or so, and then I said, you know what? I was at a private equity firm with my business partner there, and we were building businesses. A lot of social enterprise stuff was happening then. It was like when it was kind of first becoming more popular, and I had been working with Keep a Child Alive to try to help with creating income generation activities for them so they weren't so dependent on donors, and One Campaign, Data, and all these other organizations. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to Africa. I'm bugging out. And I'm going to take what we've been doing here and I'm going to do it there. So I ended up getting an offer from another guy I'd worked with, Tom Ritchie, the inventor of mountain biking. And he said, I just been to Rwanda. I want to start a bike project. Can you do it? Africa, you know how to do business, project management, branding. And I said, sure. What do you want me to do? He's like, yeah, just go. I said, sweet. Sounds like I'm gonna get you. So I did that. And I went for a 6-month project, and I came back about 10, 11 years later.
So is that how long you were in Rwanda? Were you primarily in Kigali then as the capital?
I was in Kigali. Yeah. I mean, I was all over it. I was in Congo, Goma, and up in Uganda and so on. All over that region, but then I was there for about 5 years, and then I moved to Kenya when I met my wife kind of through those activities. She was working for another major rock star philanthropist, Bob Goff, and he had her working a project there called Restore, now called Love Does, and we met in there, came back, got hitched real quick, and then bugged out to Mombasa where we wanted to move. And we were running an ethical fashion label at the time. Learned a lot through that experience. Learned the power of story and strategy and all the other things that came out of that. And yeah, so all of that was this stuff that was part of my journey that kind of took me to where I am now, working in brand development and philanthropy and kind of innovating in that both of those spaces, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because when you think of philanthropy, you don't think of brand development, right? No. You get kind of the philanthropy, which are all about, donor donations, charity, that piece of it versus, most philanthropies, to be quite honest, most companies do a horrible job of telling a story a story that the listener can empathize with and can engage with. And that's really what you're doing though, right? When you talk about brand, it really is about not creating, but really helping them tell their story as to why they do something.
Yeah, and what happened along all of that, and there's lots of other stories, but what ultimately ended up happening is I started to realize that if I was studying and I'm a deep thinker, I like to go deep into whatever it is I'm getting into. And as I did that and studying biology and science and all spirituality, and I finally kind of realized this parallel. I said, look, if I'm studying to try to get, to improve civil society in Kenya, in terms of bolstering their effectiveness, which I worked on a project for about 6 months doing that, or if I'm trying to get somebody to buy, a new artisan cheese for a cheese company I'm working for, or something like that. At the end of the day, I need to understand how people's minds work. I need to understand their motivations, their fears, their behaviors, where are they going, why are they there, why do they do what they do. And so as I studied more of that, I got more effective in both areas. And then I started to kind of interweave the two and realize, we need to be better at strategizing in philanthropy. We kind of get in a rut, we find something that works and we do it because it's economically supported. If you look at the worldwide picture of it.
Well, it is the case because it's actually the same problem with innovation, right? As soon as someone, goes through a process and they think they've figured out the process for success, whether that's raising money or how to come up with an idea and take an idea and ship a product. I mean, look, at HP, when you got to ship 40 million laptops a year, you got to kind of figure out the process to make it work. The problem is you get into that same rut that therefore then, and people think, well, if it worked yesterday, it's going to work tomorrow. In today's world, things are just changing just way too fast. So we're going to take a quick commercial break here. When we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation with Jared. We're going to talk specifically around innovation and philanthropy. So you're not going to want to go anywhere. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalk Radio.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are continuing our conversation with Jared Angaza. Jared is, I don't know, how do you describe yourself? I was trying to, come up with a category for you, but you don't fit into a category.
Perfect. I like that. I typically, I'm a root, getting to the root kind of guy, and I think at the end of the day, I tend to just go with strategist and philanthropist. Both, they work across a variety of mediums. So strategist, ultimately I do brand development. I create brands all over the place, but a lot of times that's a campaign or it's some kind of experience or an event or whatever. So there you go. Strategist.
So one of the things you and I, when we had a phone call after we got connected through Aaron Walker, was both of our interest in activities, both in Africa, but also with regards to, our frustration around the lack of innovation in the philanthropic world. It is, they get into this rut and they just think that if they just do what they did last year, that it's going to continue to go forward. So, give me your thoughts. You did Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, etc. I've spent a fair amount of time in Rwanda. I have a significant amount of investments in entrepreneurs in Rwanda, startup businesses there run by Rwandans. But I'd like to hear your perspective on the whole innovation and philanthropic world.
Well, I saw this over the years, and again, I'm always looking at the root. Like, why do people do this? Why do we have nonprofits, NGOs, or whatever, charities that are in a particular village somewhere, or even in inner city somewhere here in the States? Doesn't matter. That's been there with the same mission for eons, and I'm like, at what point do you fix the problem and walk away? Now I understand, there are big problems that we haven't quite figured out how to fix yet, but there's a whole multitude of problems that ultimately what I experienced was kind of looking at the situation. I said, is this about fixing a problem or job security? We have an industry of aid. I started writing about that, 10 years ago. And I see it. It's the people that have been there for a long time, people that get big budgets, and then they have to buy. I won't name the organization, but I had a friend that worked with one, and she's like, look, I have a couple $100,000 extra at the end of the year. I got to spend it on a couple of SUVs, and they're going to sit in the parking lot because we don't need them, but I don't get the budget if I don't get it next year.
Yeah,
like, wow.
It is the old trend-based budgeting. Whatever you spend last quarter, you get that same amount of money to spend next quarter to maintain your programs. And actually, This gets into the whole challenge, right? Because I got involved in Rwanda through 501c3 charities, right? So it's education for kids, it's whatever it is, right? But you quickly figure out though that you actually cause more harm than you cause good, because you basically build up a generation of dependence. Because 78% of the youth under the age of 18 in Rwanda have a daily requirement for outside help to survive. 78%, right? You're not helping them. They just sit back and like, oh, I'm waiting for the check to come, the monthly sponsor check, the organization that's going to feed me. And so I think it was like 2007, 2008, we switched our entire program to not even do it through any form of a charity. We do it as straight and startup investments. So we find entrepreneurs, people doing interesting work. We actually, spend time there. We actually invest that money. We get them up, and we created about 100 jobs out in Bugesera in Rwanda, which is the driest region. So the farming is the worst, right? It's kind of a beautiful area of the country. But now, you kind of have you think a little bit about what that impact is going to be. But when you do something like that, when you change the game and you create jobs for people, oh my gosh, the economic transformation of the local village has just been unbelievable. And I'm convinced, now all I do is I just do straight startup investments. And I'm not looking for venture returns. It's high risk. But, we train them how to be an entrepreneur, how to run a business, how to balance their books, how to hire, how to produce a product, how to provide local services, whatever the business is. And the satisfaction I get out of that is 1,000, 10,000 fold anything else I ever do. So what? I don't get the tax write-off. Who cares? It's really about having that economic impact. And I just think some of the charity models where you create those dependents and you don't fix the problem because you just keep the problem going versus actually trying to get in there and create a solution for something.
We're sort of incentivized financially to do that. I mean, it keeps jobs in place for the charities, for the NGOs, for all the expats that live there and so on. I mean, there's obviously a trend to some degree of philanthropy is kind of on the rise. Again, I think just through the proliferation of information and transparency and so on that we have through the internet, people are more aware and more able to do something. So great. I appreciate that trend. I think we should incorporate a little innovation in there before we get too many people flowing in that direction. And I was recently speaking to a mastermind group here in Nashville, and sort of just inadvertently kind of stumbled upon this, but ultimately what I started explaining to these guys, because it was about giving back. How do we give back more effectively? I said, look, there's three ways, in my opinion. And one is aid. Okay, so that's the Mother Teresa kind of scenario where you're going in and you're saying, look, we're applying some antiseptic to the wound. We're taking care of people. We're easing some human suffering. And then so that's one kind. And then there's self-actualization, which kind of raises some eyebrows. and I say, look, we send missions groups and whatever, all these kids go over and they spend $80,000 on the trip, and then they come and they have somebody like me used to anyway in Rwanda that has to take care of them while they're there and stop everything that I'm doing, and it's difficult and whatever. I'm obviously saying the negative side to make a point, but there are positive sides too. But so there, all that stuff happens, and then they paint a church or they put a bell in the school or what, and they leave, and I'm like, wow, thanks guys. And I think, what could I have done with that money and so on. Now, I don't want to just say that's a bad thing. I think we need to turn it around and look at it a little bit differently and say, okay, what really happened there is all those kids, those missionaries, whatever, they came over and their perspective was rocked. They saw something different. They experienced something different. It changed the way they view the world. And then they go back and they may be an entrepreneur. They may incorporate that into their life or their family or whatever. I think that's valuable, but let's call it what it is. That's part of your self-actualization journey. You're not really helping that many people on the other side.
Exactly.
And then there's the third one, and this is the one where I think you and I are now, and I think largely because of starting out in aid, self-actualizing a bit in the process. That's a continued process, and then arriving in the third box, which is paradigm shift in my mind. And I think this involves influencing the larger groups, cultures, and so on, and how they perceive the world, how they experience life. Yep. This is a perspective level. Our perspective fuels everything. Obviously.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So we're gonna hop out here for another quick commercial break. When we come back, Jared, what I want to do is we talked kind of what those three things are, but what would be your advice in this space that people listening to the show today could take away? So we're gonna come right back after this quick commercial break, and Jared's gonna give us our walking points as we wrap up here, coming into segment 3. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break.
Biz Talk Radio.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Well, welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get started, I want to extend an appreciation to our sponsor for today's show, which is Zoom. Zoom has been a sponsor for the last quarter or so. They just notified us they're actually going to extend the sponsorship. So thanks to all of you who've listened to the sponsorship for Zoom and have gone out and actually tried out their technology. They're a video collaboration technology that is, like, bar none, the best out there. Great video, great audio, great screen sharing, which I use. And I'm literally in Zoom every day with my teams all over the world. And like I said, I've been using this for over a year, and I've tried them all. I won't name other competitive products, but I've tried them all. And with Zoom, it's the only video collaboration tool I've ever used that just doesn't suck. And so for me, that is key, and that it always works, and it works around the world. I've used it from Africa to Shenzhen to Hong Kong, and I'll be using it when I'm up here on my trip coming up soon here to Asia Pacific. So try it out. Hop on over to killerinnovations.com/Zoom. You get a free account, and you can bring up to 50 people into a single meeting on that free account. So try it out, killerinnovations.com/Zoom, and pick up your free account and try it if you haven't already tried it. So Jerry, let's pick it up where we left off on the issues around innovation and philanthropy. You laid out kind of the three kind of, I don't know if you want to call them almost progressions from, people start, in the normal phases. And, if you're in the philanthropy world long enough, you kind of realize that it's something better, and you kind of do the experimentations. But give us three pieces of advice. You've been doing this for a long time. You've lived in country, which gives everybody who's in the philanthropy world a whole different perspective than being the remote write the check thing when you're there for years on end. So give us three pieces of advice that people who are interested in innovating in the philanthropy world should keep in mind or should do.
Well, first of all, to clarify too, on those three steps, and I think they are a kind of a progression, but I don't necessarily think that, I don't know, I think some people stay in certain boxes, and we need the Mother Teresa's of the world. We need aid agencies. We need the Charity Waters.
It shouldn't be, let's make sure. What we're not saying is that any one of them is bad, and that if you stay in one place, we need people in each of those areas.
Absolutely.
But fully agreed.
And at this point, my experience and your experience, our experience in the aid world, and then realizing some of the self-actualization that was going on and kind of going, wait a minute, we could go deeper here. We could innovate. We could be more strategic. I read a lot of Eastern philosophies and just a lot of Sun Tzu in my life. And so I'm thinking about, how can we create better strategies? How can we go deeper? How can we affect the perspective? And then ultimately have then kind of ended up in this other box. And again, I think all three are important, and I still am involved in all three of those boxes as well. Now, at the same time, I also realize that there is this symbiotic relationship between the world's maladies and the organizations that have kind of come together to fix them, to correct those maladies. And I say maladies because I think it is kind of a sickness. Some of the things that we have that I see as symptoms are like war, poverty, famine, and all these things that they're fires. They're fires that we want to put out, and we can raise money for those fires. We can raise support for those fires. When you talk about going perspective level, people are like, right, you kind of lose people. But I think we have to. I think we have to step away from that symbiotic relationship and start to address perspective levels, because we know that as Americans here, we think about the impacts that we've had in our lives that made a huge difference in the trajectory of our life. A lot of times it was a book or a movie or some kind of experience that we had. It wasn't necessarily someone coming in from a foreign country and teaching us how to do things either. So I think that we need to value relationship more, just relationships. For instance, ultimately from all my time in Rwanda, aside from all the learning, I think the most powerful thing I did was I adopted a kid. Who's my son. It has been for the last 11, 12 years. And that's an ongoing event, obviously. That family is. I'm helping him create a bread company in Kigali right now. So he He just moved back. But there, I see that was, by the way, the most profound learning experience of my life was starting to be a father, first of all, and second of all, to a Rwandan street kid. And I learned so much about culture and the importance of incorporating that into everything. But I think that then culture is an important aspect of this too. Culture is just a collective perspective of a group of people, typically in a particular geographic location. And I think we need to look at things instead of just going in and fighting these fires that we can kind of pat ourselves on the back for because they're kind of obvious fixes, but they're temporary fixes typically.
Mm-hmm.
We're creating dependency and so on and so on. I mean, go in and ease the pain, but fix the problem. Don't go in and ease the pain every year. That doesn't help. So I think we have to look at this kind of, I don't think you can do philanthropy, let's just say, without starting to ask some of the bigger questions about, like, what is this game all about? Like, why are we here? And then you get into some spiritual discussions and so on. And I think that's important. We have to leave room for that. I don't think you can separate things. I've always wondered, why do we have business and philanthropy separate? And then we have to create terms like social enterprise, and we have to create terms like
B Corp, B Corps or whatever. Yeah. Now we have this all new structure so that it's okay to have philanthropy as your objective, which means your shareholders become secondary. It's like we have to create this legal structure for this.
Well, and perhaps your shareholders could be more interested in something more than just the financial ROI.
Yep.
There's social impact and so on. And we're seeing that sort of emerging now in a bigger way, and I appreciate that. But I also think, again, you have to take a step back and say, apparently business has gotten so off the rails that we had to create these other kind of ways of referring to business that isn't oppressive.
Well, I think there's maybe a little bit of a counter look to that, because there are some businesses that have stayed out right from the beginning that they held a social objective, right? And I think, well, actually, I just did a whole series around short-term thinking. It was a previous podcast here last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever, right? And I'm a big believer that the short-term quarterly objectives, ROI kind of model doesn't work even if you don't have a social objective, just in your long-term success, right? Because whether you're going to innovate in philanthropy or you're going to innovate in business, it's a long-term bet, and you got to be committed to finding the solution, not band-aid the problem on a quarter-by-quarter basis.
Yeah. I mean, think about asking Mother Teresa, for instance, in this, like, was it a success? Like, how the heck is she going to quantify that?
Exactly. And how long did she work at it?
Yeah.
It's a lifetime commitment. This is not
okay,
I got to figure out what my quarter objectives are and, what my metrics are.
But we can value that from afar. But if someone's, and this gets into my next point, but if someone's doing it right now, you're like, hey, where's your financial model here or whatever? And I realize, money makes the world go round. That's another discussion. Maybe we'll do another podcast. But I think that we have to step back and say, I had this conversation recently too with some family members actually. But think about like Martin Luther King and what he was doing at the time. Imagine what his mother was saying. Martin, you put yourself in the crosshairs. Please just take care of your family. Don't go out and do this crazy stuff. It's never going to work. It's too much momentum in the other direction, and so on and so on. What if, and this is what I'm interested in the paradigm shift box, what if we fostered environments that were that were more conducive for the dreamers, for the people that say the innovators, that say even look at Tesla. I mean, that guy was, they basically just said he was schizo after a while because the environment said this is out of place. Yep. Even Einstein, he had his own troubles as well. What if we fostered different environments that were more conducive for that supported that gave more incentive for that, instead of it being, the incentive is really to go the other direction.
Right. Perfect. So before we wrap up this segment, Jared, where can people find you? And I know you've got a podcast out. So what's the name of your podcast again?
The podcast is Inipi Radio, INIPI, and it is on iTunes and Stitcher and all the other places.
And they can also search for your name and find it on iTunes. And we'll have links for all that in the show notes. Where else can they find you? What's your personal site?
My website covers all the ground there, and it's just jaredangaza.com, and that's where I do brand development and strategizing and campaigns and events and all that.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and we'll get all that up on the show notes. so that you can have all the coordinates for Jared. Go over, check out his podcast, and follow what he's up to. And maybe one of these times we'll get Jared back onto the show here, and we'll get into a little bit more of our collective opinions on some of the challenges of philanthropy. We've got off on the commercial breaks. Jared and I do a lot of no comparing. We have a very common philosophy on some of this. So we're going to go out and take a quick commercial break here. When we come back, we've got some interesting announcements to make. So don't go anywhere. We got some really interesting stuff coming up. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. You're listening to Kill Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalk Radio.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Kill Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. One thing I'm going to share with you today is in previous shows I've had announced and shared with you, specifically around the Innovators Network. So the Innovators Network is a new entity. I've committed all of my copyrights, all of my intellectual properties have been licensed to the Innovators Network. The show and all that will be moving over, will be produced by the Innovators Network. So no changes. It's the same thing. It's me, doing my thing. But today, we're actually announcing the second person to join the Innovators Network, and that is Kim McNicholas. Now, Kim has been on this show many times. I've been on her show many times. She broadcast a show live on Friday at 1 o'clock Pacific time at KDOW, which is the premier talk radio station in Silicon Valley. And she has people on her show, guests that are like Sir Richard Branson and Shaq and, you name it, the people that are on there. So Kim is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. She was formerly a reporter with Forbes. Ran also Forbes Video, went over and was one of the original people running, and she ran the video side of Pando. Most recently, she's been the executive director at the Extreme Tech Challenge, which is the competition run and judged by Sir Richard Branson. If you top 3 winners, get to go to Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's private island, and for a whole week of mentoring between Branson and Tim Ferriss and a bunch of other people. So Kim's been around a lot. We are announcing her show on the Innovators Network. So you'll have a chance to get that downloaded as a podcast. It's a brand new show. It's actually taking the work that she did on KDOW, which will be live. She goes live on Friday. The show posts over the weekend. You're not going to want to miss this. She's got some absolutely phenomenal guests. And so with that in mind, I'm actually going to play a segment of her show here, so you can kind of get a little feel for the content. This episode is around a segment that she is talking about is innovation in sports. So we're going to listen to this. I'll come back and give you some more details about it. But here is Kim McNicholas on innovation.
I think Tesla is ready to beat today's stock car. And to affirm my theory, possibly, is Blake Fuller, who is on the line. This tech entrepreneur and founder and CEO of GoPuck and electric racing pioneer as well, proved on July 1st, 2016, that the Tesla zero-emission four-door is capable of matching its fuel-guzzling counterparts on the track. He smashed the Pikes Peak Hill climb record by more than a minute. It's a historic 12.42-mile challenge that features 156 turns over an ascent of just more than, 14,000 feet before drivers reach the snow-covered summit. Blake Fuller has won the race before in a gas guzzler, but he who helped build the first hybrid race car in North America and has also designed the lithium-ion technology used in every motorsports category from IndyCar to F1, set a new production electric vehicle record of 11 minutes, 48 seconds. Nice going, Blake.
Hey, Thank you, Kim.
You smashing that Pikes Peak Hill climb by record by more than a minute in a Tesla. Was that a Model S?
Yeah, so actually, great question. So it was the Model S, which actually makes the vehicle that we built and campaigned the first ever Model S race car, which is pretty phenomenal to think that with the amount of Model S's, I mean, you go through San Francisco and literally you can't go 5 minutes without seeing a Model S being driven or driving itself down the highway.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
And that nobody had built one into a race car.
Was this your same Model S, the same one you used to drive your family around?
Yeah, it was.
No way.
That makes it kind of fun.
So what sort of modifications did you make? I mean, the car, the original car, right out of Tesla, isn't that like 5,300 pounds?
Yeah, actually, mine tipped the scales, I think, closer to 55 because every option box from the glass roof to the rear, 7 seats to air suspension to premium stereo to premium leather. It's just like hiking, the heavier your backpack, the harder you got to work. So it was a pretty heavy backpack, figuratively speaking, with the Tesla. And we reduced about 700 pounds out of the car.
Wow.
And part of that was there is a lot of luxury items within this car. I mean, it's a $100,000 plus luxury vehicle that competes against the Mercedes S-Class and the 7 Series. So there's a lot of creature comforts that are really just luxuries when it comes to racing. So those get jettisoned pretty quickly. And then we worked with another local area company, which is called Kurtz Fabrication, that's in Sonoma, and was able to make a beautiful cage that was able to, of course, have a safe car in the event that something happened.
What did you need to do in order to really modify your racing style from driving a gas guzzler to electric?
Yeah, so when it comes to driving style, it's kind of interesting because in 2007, Nissan North America actually, in a factory-assisted effort, we built the first hybrid race car out of a production sedan. And that was a great learning experience because we used that for what is the successor to the Cannonball Run or like a Gumball Rally, where we not only crossed the country, but we raced at different tracks. And it's amazing that, typical racing technique that you would have of trying to not only get a fast lap, but conserve fuel, like in an endurance race strategy, is a lot of the same type of mentality with an electric car from a standpoint of conserving energy.
Yeah.
However, it has a completely different feel with something like a Model S where, yes, there's a lot of weight to the car, but everything's very low, so it feels lighter than it is. And it has, the equivalent of, depending on who wants to debate the topic, somewhere between 650 to 900 horsepower, depending on, how there's a big debate about what the actual horsepower correlation is, because that's just a math number. But from a standpoint of the car, the battery has plenty of power to make it up to the top at full tilt. The vehicle chassis, the brakes, they can run 100%. The real difficulty is that that's a lot of horsepower to continuously put through a lot of the electronic components.
Oh, yeah.
And so in the benefit of safety, Tesla has built in certain safety limits to make sure that these cars are extremely safe in a wide variety of conditions around the world. And so we had to kind of work within those limits and then optimize it. So it was really almost a game of chess. And it was fun.
Do you think that it has the potential to take on and maybe even beat the current stock car in the NASCAR circuit at the moment?
So if you want to figure out what the answer is on that question, hop on over, check out the show. You can go over to theinnovators.network. And also, I'll have all the show notes and links. You want to check out Kim's show. And we appreciate you taking your time out of your Sunday and joining us here at Innovations. And we will talk to you next Sunday on the show on Biz Talk Radio.
The opinions you hear on Biz Talk Radio are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of this station, Biz Talk Radio, its management, or advertisers. The information on Biz Talk Radio does not constitute a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or service. If you have any questions about Biz Talk Radio, contact us at 817-274-1609 or at biztalkradio.com. Biz Talk Radio.